Thank you, everybody, and I hope you've managed to get a drink and get yourselves comfortable again. So we're going to move on to our final speaker, Dr. Nathan Keates. Thank you so much, Nathan, because I think you've managed to squeeze this in. It looks like it while you're still at work, so we greatly appreciate that. And Nathan's presentation is With or Without Interpersonal Disparities, Taking Up Theatre and Improv.
Yes. Okay, thank you very much. Now I will attempt to share the screen, which shows what made things different. Share. And voila.
Yeah, looking good.
Good. Okay, super. Minimize this as well. And we should be fine. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk today and talk about this chapter. You might be able to hear that I've got a sore throat of some kind. So I'll keep talking until you can't hear me anymore because there's nothing coming out of me. But we'll give it a go. Yeah, so I'm Dr. Nathan Keates, and you've heard the title of what I'm going to talk about. So we're going to go forwards and click. There we go. So in general, let's just introduce what we're talking about here. So I am talking broadly about theatre. It's a collaborative form of fine art involving live performers. They present the experience of a real or imagined event, for example, a story, through acting, singing, and/or dancing before a live audience in a specific place. You know, that's theatre, right? I studied improv. Yes, that's improv comedy. There can be dramatic forms of improv, but it's a little bit more unique of a thing to happen. It does happen. And this is where people co-create the theatre content as they go. Spontaneous creation. It might be a set of games. It might be completely improvised scenes or sketches, and even songs. People improvise songs as well. So it's a wide scope of what happens. That's the context, the artistic context, I suppose. There we go. It did go forwards. That's good. So within this, we can say that there is an interpersonal aspect to it, right? It's interpersonal of the social arts, theatre as social arts. Theatre requires interpersonal relations, so thus is a social art and that differs between the forms of theatre. For example, dance requires an embodied experience of the communication as a shared form of language, and this includes with the audience as well. They understand and interpret the movements in dance. And so theatre is a social art due to the collective creativity of the theatre makers and the audience. And you can obviously put that to the collective on stage as well, and how that gets to being performed as a form of social art. Therefore, we can see that theatre in various forms is a communication of ideas or other terms, for example, emotions, feelings, subtext, or the unsaid communication, etc., towards the audience through that latter part of the example anyway. An example is that the audience will often know something before a character or at the same time, perhaps. I've encountered writers who suggest the character cannot be ahead of the audience, which may depend on the genre of the script. And in improv, the actors, let alone the characters, are discovering the moment as it happens with the audience, which often generates laughter. More generally, besides the audience, making theatre work requires social engagement to obtain the role and to create the production, although not all jobs necessitate social contact throughout the process. I assume we can collectively think of many writers who do not engage with the process after they've completed their writing. I recently watched a documentary about keeping up appearances, which links in here, and the writer finished the scripts and never went to the set. He didn't even meet the actors, so I believe it, which is quite a remarkable thing, I think. And improv as a social art, as that was my focus here, well, the context I studied. Communication is heightened, and because of this, it requires a greater meta-communication, if you will, that unspoken communication, the thing that goes between people that is not stated in words. And the interactions between characters and performers is what creates this social art. Having to have that form of metacommunication, that unspoken words, where you are developing the scene, developing these characters co-creatively, so co-creation of those moments. And this is why Engelbert suggests it's a social art. And I believe that's true. So using this, or through this metacommunication, we would obtain group mind and flow, because of how generally you'd assume, or it would be necessary that you'd use these created rules, if you will, to obtain the flow, or to engage in that ease of that co-creation. And in a way, this is why people would suggest that there's elements of being psychic on the stage, but it's not really true. It's just group mind. You just are using these unspoken words to co-create. And this is for the purpose of cohesive co-creation. And Keith Sawyer said back in the early 90s that everyone relates spontaneously throughout each day in everyday adult life. And this is just amplified on stage. I wonder, in 2007 at a conference in Cardiff, was speaking about this very thing. He said that the difference between life and stage is a condensed space and time, and you're just consenting it into a performance. And linking this to autistic people, then, the physical and social environment is designed to be inclusive. We have to put a question mark here, because sometimes it won't be the case. This is obviously what we're talking about, right? So with theatre as a social space, how is it that it can be inclusive, that we can provide accessible means to do it, watch it, whatever context you want to talk about? And Fletcher Watson said that autistic needs are not static nor homogeneous. It requires autistic people to self-regulate. And this derives from autistic-led autism conferences such as Autscape and Auttreat. So that's one context of it. Knowing that how it can be inclusive is what we'll come to later around understanding oneself. Another aspect of this could well be this example. As theatre professionals, one autistic improviser attended an equity event, which is a performing arts and entertainment trade union. And they were talking to another person, and they found similar interests, similar ways of expressing themselves. And surprise, surprise, who they were talking to was also neurodivergent. And a little bit more here then. Theatre also has a lot of autistic or broadly neurodivergent performers, as the story suggests, right? You might accidentally find commonalities of neurotype in an event, right? We can understand that the different social arenas in theatre and communities of forms of theatre would happen like this as well. You might just happen to encounter other autistic people. And we might know of autistic-led theatre companies in the same light. For example, Neurospace Theatre. And these will have some ease as social relations of autistic people are positioned easier and cross-neurotype. And obviously not all theatre companies will have this single neurotype or be all neurodivergent of some kind. And recently, actually, I had someone asking for or seeking advice, just as we were talking. And this was around how to support transitions out of theatre ones. And it was an interesting question, but in a way, it links to what we said a moment ago around how there was how it's not just a simple reductive way of answering such a thing. You need to understand the different ways that it works. I probably don't really need to get into what I said in response to it, but it's an interesting point around this person understanding that there's an opportunity to be had to understand how to better do their role in theatre. And ultimately, there are obviously dangers that people experience, but also positives too. So let's start with from dangers in theatre then. And I'm not seeking to claim that theatre is a sanctuary nor a cause of harm for autistic people. In my study back in 2023 that was published then, some autistic people found theatre as a problematic sector, just in general, right? That's professionally and within a community setting. For example, people are commenting on the false nature of networking and professional friendships. Perhaps normative ideals that underpin these behaviours are present. That would be a fairly obvious statement in a simple way, because if it happens outside the theatre, probably you'd understand that these normative ideals would be prolonged within theatre itself. Going back to the study there, what contrasted this was the fact that improv was seemingly a safer space, or just seemingly safer is probably a better way of actually saying it, as it says here. And that's because, well, that was in contrast to the theatre community, or the general theatre community were less accepting. The one example I had was actually in American context, where community theatre is like the UK's amateur dramatics, and they're trying to enter the community theatre, and they weren't really accepted. They were turned away. And I'm obviously not trying to suggest that improv is completely safe, as this is not true at all. There's been news throughout the years around sexism, racism, and so you'd assume there'd be ableism. It just so happened that I didn't hear that in my studies. Turning towards dispositional disparities, so we'll start with social relations that occur, obviously can create outsiders, sometimes positions the marginalized in an out group, right? That's what we're talking about then. So autistic people, I'm sure we've heard lots of today, are seen and are an enduring outsider group based on that comparison to the neurotypical performance of the neuromajority. So these disparities, or this disparity, is through the marginalization of people due to personal characteristics that lead to a dispositional disparity. We can probably use that phrasing for modern use autistic people, right? And that's because there is a natural diversity. Everyone has a certain disposition that they hold. We all have a diversity of how we are, how we talk, behave, and such, and however you wish to phrase it. There's that natural diversity that exists. So the autistic way of being is the disposition from which they disregarded, or they become disregarded or ostracized. And that's a problem within the wider system, and not just interpersonal relations. But today I'm going to be focusing on discussing the micro aspects, which are more pertinent to theatre. So, double empathy problem in theatre. Many autistic people have felt they thrive or fit well within comedy, especially stand-up comedy. I've spoken to various autistic comedians over the years, and social communication within stand-up clubs are seemingly easier, or they're seen as easy, or experienced as easy. Some of these would be because there's a community of stand-up comedians, and there's self-directed content. You can just not talk to people. And in improv, to go to this context, in improv, there's this aspect of unconditional positive regard. And if someone did not wish to stay to socially engage, then no one would necessarily judge them. It obviously depends on specific community, but in general, based on that, let's say, philosophy of improv, there's that unconditional positive regard, that acceptance that's innate in it because of what improv is, how it works. And in my survey of improvisers, I did a survey a number of years ago. I did, however, find that many people do feel marginalized in improv, i.e. those in later life, older people, if you wish, those that do not go to pubs, as this is a usual way of solidifying community in improv. You hang out. Those who were more right-wing felt marginalized, as one respondent commented. Improv is less welcoming of such political stance. Some communities will not have representation from non-white improvisers, which is likely about important identities being forefronted to enable people to join. Obviously, practice needs to match needs too. So that'd be a part of that, part of what we're talking about. However, for age, I've got an example for age. I have had an improviser in later life state how they had physical restrictions in their body, they couldn't do as much, and all the other people were young and physically agile, but the teacher ensured that their way of playing, the older improviser, their way of playing, again within their physical limits, was fully embraced. Which takes us to accommodation and acceptance, within improv as our example. In improv, understanding one's needs and having self-knowledge is important. Well, that's important outside of improv as well, but my example is going to be within improv. So I had an autistic improviser comment on this, right? And broadly it was about the theatre space during rehearsal, and the person running the session just accommodated the request without question. The specifics of it is that they went to their rehearsal and they're already quite drained, already quite a little bit overwhelmed with the day, and they just said, "These theatre lights, they are too bright. Can they be dimmed?" And without question, they were dimmed. That's a specific example. But what this example tells us is that they knew themselves, they understood their needs in that moment, they had the self-knowledge that they needed a certain thing to happen, and they expressed it, and it was accommodated. So knowledge is necessary. Without knowledge, the results can be self-blame. For example, not an improv example, just a broad example here, an autistic person may not be lazy, and instead it could be inertia. So this is basically hermeneutic injustice, not understanding oneself based on not knowing or having the words for one's experience. And in this example, not knowing about inertia leads to the assumption that they're lazy. And we can further that even more. And the chapter talks around stigma, and we can talk about this in relation to this as well, that belief around the discourse that about yourself, about that personal characteristic, is thus important. You might have that self-stigmatization. You're saying to yourself that it's because of the way I am that this is happening, or something, or other, that I'm lazy, or whatever it's going to be. And obviously we can speak lots more about that, but I'm just going to leave it as a comment, and feel free to read the chapter for more about stigma in this area. Issues related to dispositional disparity. Let's just go through a lot various issues, and metaphorically speaking, attack them afterwards. Employability includes access to performing, networking, and friendship-based building in industry. So theatre has gatekeepers as casting directors, agents, and management companies, theatre directors, and trade union rules. So on one of these, in theatre, agents will work for professional actors, where there's many issues generally, but an actor needs theatre work in order for an agent to get them on in their books. So the agent has to watch the performer, which then results in the agent hiring them and thereafter seeking work for the actor. And this is a type of catch-22, because you need to work to get the agent, but you need work, you need the agent to get the work. You know, it's a cycle, it's a catch-22. And that's just a general problem. And if you put into this things like judgments, whereby autistic people are rapidly perceived more negatively than non-autistic people, then you can see there's already a problem there. So diving into this a little bit more, and I think my voice is getting worse, so I'll just take a quick sip of water. Creatives obtain commissions or gain roles as an actor in a production, as you'd expect. And the answer about how these obtaining the work would happen tends to be about who you know, who the person knows, and the networking, which is obviously a continuation from this point around thin sliced judgments. So autistic people, when the norms are a barrier to engagement with others, networking can be thus a problem. And in the arts, it's no different and potentially even more troubling, where you can look at Buckley and Collins around that a more broader look at insight into the arts. And even exclusionary practices are not just felt by autistic people, but disabled performers more generally. So based on this, we can determine that our dispositional diversity enters the varying workplaces or hobby grounds, because not everyone's professional, beyond whether someone is autistic or not. It is an overview of the crucial account of how double empathy problem relates to theatre and coming from the original use of the theory. In improv, people have various dispositions, which may be conceptualized more on the meso level, focusing on groups and community cultures, organizations, or social networks. And one aspect in the literature about improv is mindfulness, which I found was not validated in my survey study with improvisers disconfirming or confirming factors of improv. Perhaps this is because those already interested in mindfulness see these tenets in improv more than those who do not, and perhaps would not employ these aspects in their community, and thus not within the culture of their improv community, to go to the meso level again, or to refer back to other. Obviously, mindfulness has been promoted in recent years, and specifically for autistic people, and we can acknowledge that this does not counter systemic issues, but it might help cope in the moment, at least for some. Returning back to the social then, autistic preference seems to be this direct approach to friendship, whereas ambiguity may play an important part for some non-autistic friendships. The social contact may impinge on how autistic theatre professionals may maintain a collegial friendship-based social contact, bringing us back to that friendship aspect that we spoke about earlier. And within improv, whereby most of the improv around the world is not professional, but community-driven, autistic improvisers might encounter difficulties with accessing stage time. How do you get stage time? You need to be connected. You need to go through the processes of improv, which we could spend time on, but we probably shouldn't. Maintaining and building a collegial friendship or collegial friendships may be a possible barrier to stage time due to the difference in how friendships operate for autistic people. Let me just check if all right, we're bringing it to the end here. How long is it? All right. Ooh, I've been speaking a while. Let's do the conclusion and not speak more. So to conclude, performers across different neurotypes can find value in theatre, offering a respite from everyday life through imaginative worlds. Autistic performers engage in this art form, yet some have reported negative experiences, with improv often being easier due to its emphasis on unconditional positive regard. However, limited research points to potential ableism within theatre practices, which could affect rehearsals and social interactions. And obviously, there's not a lot of research on improv. Despite my point being that then thus we wouldn't really see a lot of ableism if a lot of research hasn't been done. Maybe they'll just be missed in the sample and such. Despite challenges, many autistic individuals thrive in the industry, such as in stand-up comedy, but face obstacles like thin slice judgments and gatekeeping, as a general comment around that, impacting networking and friendship opportunities. And inclusive practices can improve experiences for autistic performers, though these are not always present. So double empathy problem highlights a natural diversity within theatre and obviously real life. The non-fictitious world, I think is the phrase I used. Yeah, there's lots of anecdotes and such we can probably point out towards this, which is could be funny comments, but we'll leave it there. Thank you for listening. Here's the reference to the chapter.
Fabulous. Thank you, Nathan. And I love non-fictitious worlds. I think that's how we should all refer to whatever reality is. And we are there's quite a few comments in the chat feeling your pain right now. So really thank you because you did sound a bit more poorly as you went through. You may be kind of secretly hoping that there might not be many questions to save your voice, but I've got one straight away for you, Nathan, from Morris, who says, how do you get around slow processing of cues? If I easily miss moments to get into conversation, surely it would be even more difficult in a theatre setting where they need to fill gaps.
Let's work on the on-stage relationships with this one. So if you're thinking about slow processing in the general theatre context, then what we have there is rehearsals. So your slow processing is just going to be rehearsed. So you'll end up just going back to the script and so on. And if you've learned your script, if you're doing scripted work, then you're not processing the script anymore. So if you think about just trying to process one bit at a time, then the next bit that you're processing would be how's the person saying their words back to you. You've looked at the script, you know that already. In the context of improv and work on stage, again, the slow processing, then there is some more research that's required in this one, I would suggest. However, in a similar way, if you have you've gone to a load of classes, you've experienced how improv works, you've experienced how it works for you because it is individual, then you're going to have ways or affordances where you are no longer worried about slow processing, because in fact all you're really doing is doing the last bit. It goes back to the comment earlier around driving, right? There's lots of things you have to do for driving. So how would you go about that? Well, it's because you've learned it, right? If you've learned the basics of, I don't really need to go into the basics of improv, but let's just go through the saying you've learned the first bits, first stage of it, then you've got all the way up to going through to doing something complex, some sort of UCB gamey sort of improv stuff that we probably don't have a clue what that is. But if you're going to do that, then you're at this point where that slow processing is not going to be an issue necessarily, because you're focused on that one thing in the same respect as scripted stuff. And the other part of it is, well, if you miss something, then with that unconditional positive regard, no one's going to care, because they're working with what you are doing rather than what you're not doing. And that's how improv works, really. It's about that side of things. So they're just going to work with what exists rather than what doesn't exist, which is probably what we should do in life.
Thank you, Nathan. There are a few comments in chat, sort of generally about imaginative worlds sort of being important for neurodivergent people, and Kevin makes a really interesting comment, and I wonder if this maybe came out in some of the research that you've done. So Kevin said that he kind of has enjoyed it, find it quite cathartic being on stage, and maybe it's something about finally being in the spotlight or being heard and uninterrupted, and says that Paddy Considine says something similar about acting. So I don't know, I wonder if that came through.
Yeah, I recognize that. It is about there's so many different directions with this, realistically. So yeah, you can use it in a therapeutic sense, applied improv sense, where you're bringing out those stories. Dr. Adam Blattner and their partner Alison Blattner, they have a book that they wrote around is basically improvisation, called Art by Play, and it's about bringing your stories in, playing around with your stories and such. And I think it's really helpful in that regard. And I'm going to get lost because there's so many different directions I can take this. So that's definitely one aspect of it. With theatre and scripted work, you're allowing yourself to play, you're allowing yourself to be someone else. And in improv, you're doing the same thing, but you're also allowing yourself to be present, right? You're bringing yourself to the work because you've got nothing else anyway. Whether that's flipping on its head and doing something that's never something you'd normally do, but it's safe to do it in this environment, or whether you are exploring something that happened some years ago and you're doing it in improv because it's a safe place to go out. What else could I have done, right? There's various forms of theatre, like for theatre of the oppressed, where you play out your stories, you replay your stories and such, in forum theatre. So there's a billion answers to this, and I probably will probably need to be quiet now. I think Damien had a point.
There's lots of comments. I know Damien has commented about his dad being an actor, and finding that much easier where something is scripted than the improv of the everyday life. Bringing us back again to Goffman. Have I missed anything, Damien, that you said? Sorry. Oh, sorry, I'd have to mute you. Right, I've just unmuted you, Damien. So if there is anything that I've missed in the comments that you said, or I've asked you to unmute.
It's just when I was referring to my dad, he just, in a way, could express himself more through playing a role on stage because there's a predictability and a level of control if you're owning the stage, as it were, and pronouncing out that he could express himself in ways that he didn't feel comfortable doing so in everyday life. And so, very good stage actor and director. So it's that kind of got into those kind of areas. And he did like a lot of Samuel Beckett type stuff, you know. So he's that kind of guy. But probably autistic, but was never diagnosed because of his age bracket kind of thing. But I think there's quite a few actors that have come out as being autistic. There's something about it that appeals to a certain character, I guess.
Yeah, one of the comments that I've heard people make is that isn't everyone in improv autistic?
Yeah. I once heard Phoebe Caldwell say that the more obscure the hobby or interest, the greater the percentage of autistic people. I've found quite a few just in table tennis, let alone sort of more obscure pursuits. So
yeah.
it's that not caring if it's cool or not type of thing. Outside the world.
Yeah. I suppose for the social life of improv, it provides a way of communicating. You would, if you're an improviser, you meet someone else who's done similar sort of improv training, you're just going to do that with one another, having a laugh with one another, just bit after bit, it being some sort of funny thing that happens, just to riff off of it together. Yeah, that makes sense. It gives you that sort of structure. There's rules without rules in improv. Yeah, there's a rule that you break the rules, but yeah, breaking it because it's part of the rules.
I guess there's a shared language, though.
Yeah.
What you're saying.
Yeah, definitely.
That plays into the whole double empathy problem, is when there's often two frameworks colliding. it's not a shared language at all.
Yeah. And that's probably why these sorts of comments I said a moment ago probably do work. Yeah. Is there anything else I should be talking about, or are we just going off on one?
I don't think I've missed anything. Lots of comments. If anybody thinks I have, then please put your hand up, or write it again quickly at the bottom so it doesn't get lost. But just
we should again in a couple of weeks with some more presentation.
Yes, we will. I think this evening's. Thank you again, Nathan. Paul said earlier, go and get some vocal zone lozenges. You need to look after that throat. I think the three presentations and chapters tonight kind of really complement one another, in terms of the dramaturgy with Goffman and that kind of more, the thinking about the creative ways of expressing oneself, and clearly the improv. So anybody would think we planned it like that, Damien, to complement. So we'll have our next installment on the 17th of November. I don't know if we're able to confirm schedule yet, or is it still being tweaked?
Being a bit tweaked, although you may be on the schedule.
Okay.
And also potentially Katie Monday, I think, was on double empathy and the double rainbow, navigating life as a transgender autistic person. And Roberto and Alice looking at humankind and neurocultural mediation.
Interesting. And mine will be, for those who've not seen the book, mine will be on dementia and the double empathy problem. So we'll be returning back to Phoebe Caldwell and intensive interaction. So thank you then to all three of you. Thanks, Damien, Paul, and Nathan. Always hugely grateful for people giving up the time, at the end of the day, especially the dark nights. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Your questions and comments are really what make this make the park work so vibrant, and the comments are always really great. So thank you ever so much. We'll get information on as quickly as we can, and get the Eventbrite up. Apologies, I know Eventbrite is always a little bit clunky, but it's free, and that's always helpful too when we have zero budget. So yeah, keep an eye on Park and on social media, and we'll get that out to you as soon as we possibly can. But thanks, everybody, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.